My dad said pay the tuition yourself, while secretly spending my college fund on his stepkids and a scam business. So I went to my grandparents and watched my dad's whole fake life collapse. I'm 17 female and I've gone to private school my entire life. It's not one of those ultra expensive places where kids drive Teslas to class, but it's a solid school. The teachers are great. I'm in advanced classes, and most importantly, all my friends are there. It's been my home for years. A couple of weeks ago, my dad and stepmom sat me down for one of those serious family talks. You know, the kind where you already know it's not going to end with good news. Yeah, that kind. They told me I'd have to switch schools because they couldn't afford my tuition anymore. No warning, no heads up, just you're going to public school next year. I tried to keep my cool and explain why switching wasn't just about the academics. My friends are at this school. I've built relationships with my teachers. I've been here since middle school, and I'm in advanced classes that I probably wouldn't get to continue if I switched schools. But they weren't budging. It felt like no matter what I said, the decision had already been made. Then came the worst part. My dad said I had two choices. Either I switch to public school or I figure out how to pay for my tuition myself, like what I was 16. I couldn't exactly pick up a part-time job and magically earn thousands of dollars a year. I asked if there was any way to make it work. Maybe cut back on other expenses, but they shut me down before I could even finish my sentence. My stepmom gave me this whole speech about how times are tough and how they'd already made sacrifices. She made it sound like I was being selfish for even asking. Then my dad hit me with the cherry on top. He said if I asked my grandparents for money, he'd never forgive me. Apparently that would be humiliating for him. So yeah, I was stuck. For a few days after that, I couldn't think about anything else. The idea of switching schools made me sick. It wasn't just about losing all my advanced courses. The idea of starting over in the middle of high school was a nightmare. I'd be the new girl trying to figure out where to sit at lunch, while everyone else already had their friend groups. I tried to bring it up with my dad again, hoping that maybe he'd reconsider if he saw how much this was bothering me, but he just repeated the same thing. We can't afford it anymore. He didn't even try to comfort me or offer a compromise. I felt completely powerless. I couldn't afford tuition on my own, and I wasn't allowed to ask anyone else for help. It felt like no matter what I did, the outcome was the same. I'd have to leave the school that had been my second home for years. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My dad has always had a decent job in IT consulting. And while we're not rich, we've never struggled financially before. So why now? Why all of a sudden was there no money for my education? I started wondering if there was more to this story than they were telling me. Maybe there was some big expense they weren't talking about, or maybe they were just bad at managing money. Either way, I felt like I deserved to know the truth. But every time I tried to ask, they just shut me down with vague answers. It's not like I was asking for the world. I've never been the kind of kid who needs the latest phone or designer clothes. I just wanted to stay at my school where I'd built my entire life. But instead of being understanding, they acted like I was the problem for even questioning them. I even started looking up part-time jobs out of desperation. But let's be real, there's no way I could make enough to cover tuition while juggling school and everything else. And even if I somehow managed to scrape together the money, I knew my dad and stepmom would probably hold it against me forever. At this point, I felt like I was being treated like an afterthought. It was like they'd already made up their minds and I was just supposed to accept it. My dad used to tell me that I was his top priority and that he'd do anything to give me the best opportunities in life. But now it felt like I didn't even matter. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I can't help feeling like I'm being thrown under the bus here. It's not like I haven't tried to be understanding. I know life hasn't been easy for my dad after my mom passed away. It was just the two of us for years. And when he remarried, I figured it would take time for everyone to adjust. But I never thought I'd be the one expected to give up everything, while my stepmom and her kids seemed to go on like nothing had changed. I don't know what to do. I can't leave my school, it's my whole world, but I can't stay without the money to pay for it. And every time I try to bring it up, I just get shut down. It feels like I'm screaming into the void and no one's listening. That's where I'm at right now. I don't know how to move forward, and I feel like my dad and stepmom don't even care. If anyone's been in a similar situation or has advice, I'd really appreciate it. I just feel so lost. Update 1. Hey again, everyone. First of all, thanks to everyone who commented on my last post. Reading through the advice and support honestly helped me more than I thought it would. I'm back with an update because things have escalated. Let me dive right in. So after the conversation where my dad and stepmom told me I'd have to switch schools or pay for tuition myself, I couldn't stop thinking about what they said. The thing is, when people tell you not to look into something, it just makes you want to dig deeper. And while I don't have Sherlock Holmes level detective skills, I do have eyes and I'm not that dumb. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to what was happening around the house. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but I figured if something didn't add up, I'd notice it. It didn't take long. The first thing that stood out was how much Zach and Alyssa, my stepmom's kids, seemed to have. I don't mean to sound petty or jealous, but it hit me like, wait a minute. Why do they seem so comfortable when I'm being told we can't even afford my school? Zach had a new phone, not just new to him, but the actual latest model straight out of the box. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here with my hand-me-down that barely holds a charge. Alyssa, on the other hand, had a different outfit on every day, and not just regular clothes, brand name stuff. At first, I thought maybe their dad was helping out. I mean, they do have a dad who's still in the picture, and I figured he might be paying for their things. But then I overheard my stepmom on the phone with someone. I wasn't eavesdropping, I promise. She was just loud. She was talking about how she and my dad had bought Zach's new phone as a reward for something he did at school. I didn't hear the rest of the conversation, but that stuck with me. A reward. They're buying rewards while I'm being told we can't even afford the basics. That's when I started connecting dots. Every time Zach and Alyssa had something new, it wasn't coming from their dad, it was coming from ours. And it wasn't just little things. One night I saw Alyssa scrolling through some website looking at designer handbags. She casually mentioned to Zach that she'd been eyeing one for a while and thought she might get it soon. Zach just laughed and said, "Mom and Dad will probably just buy it for you." I know I shouldn't have taken it personally, but I did. It felt like such a slap in the face. They're casually joking about getting luxuries handed to them while I'm being told to give up the one thing that actually matters to me. But here's where it really got suspicious. Over the weekend, Zach and Alyssa stayed with us like they usually do. They came over Friday evening with duffel bags that looked pretty standard light and not overpacked. But by Sunday, when they were getting ready to leave, those bags were stuffed like barely zippered shut. I wasn't trying to start drama or anything, but I couldn't help asking Alyssa, "What did you bring that didn't fit when you came?" She got defensive right away, saying something about needing extra outfits for the weekend. Except, we were all at home the entire time, so I knew that wasn't it. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about those bags. I know this sounds bad, but I decided to check one of them. I just needed to see if my suspicions were right because something wasn't adding up. I went into the guest room where Zach had left his bag, unzipped it, and wow, it was full of luxury items, shoes, bags, and a couple of boxes with gadgets I didn't recognize. All brand new, some still with tags on them. I checked Alyssa's bag next, and it was the same thing. I had to sit down for a minute because my brain was spinning. I'm being told we're so broke that I need to leave my school, and this is where the money is going. New shoes, designer bags, and tech toys for Zach and Alyssa. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in. Right before they left, I asked Zach straight up, "Where did you get all that stuff in your bag?" At first, he acted clueless, like he didn't know what I was talking about. But when I pressed, he sighed and said, "Mom and Dad bought it for us." I asked why they bought so much stuff, and that's when he hit me with something that made everything click. He said, "They've been trying to make it up to us, for the whole divorce thing, That's what this was about." Zach and Alyssa never really liked my dad, and they definitely didn't like that their mom remarried. I guess my dad thought he could fix that by showering them with gifts. Zach didn't seem to think it was a big deal. He even said something like, "It's not like we're asking for it. They just want to keep us happy." He went on telling me that for the past few years, my dad and stepmom had been giving them expensive gifts, and he thinks it's probably to get them to accept my dad into the family and treat him like a father figure. Although they do accept their gifts, they have no intention of accepting my father as their dad too, because they already have a dad and they're not interested in playing happy family with another man. The guy thought he was giving me a lecture about my dad and family values and things like that, but I hardly cared about any of it. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there feeling like an idiot. While I'm over here losing sleep about my future, my dad and stepmom have been busy playing Santa Claus to kids who don't even appreciate it. When Zach and Alyssa finally left, I sat down to process everything. It all made sense now. The vague answers, the way my dad kept brushing me off, the sudden financial problems. It wasn't that we didn't have the money, it was that the money wasn't going to me. And here's the thing, this isn't just about the stuff, it's about what it represents. My dad was willing to spend money to make Zach and Alyssa happy. But when it came to me and my education that was negotiable, that's what hurt the most. At this point, I know I can't let it slide. I need answers, real ones, and there is only one place I could think of to go. But do you guys think I'm overreacting? Update 2. Hey guys, thanks for sticking with me through this whole mess. After my last post, I realized I couldn't keep all of this to myself anymore. I needed to talk to someone who might actually help me make sense of everything. That's when it hit me. I needed to go to my grandparents. For context, my mom's parents have always been a big part of my life. After my mom passed away, they stepped in to help my dad and me however they could. They're the kind of people who are just solid, they'll always have your back, but they also have this old school sense of fairness and responsibility, which let's just say doesn't always align with my dad's approach. I showed up at their house the morning after Zach and Alyssa left. I hadn't really planned what I was going to say. I just knew I couldn't sit with this by myself anymore. As soon as my grandma opened the door, she gave me one of her signature hugs. You know, the kind that makes you feel like maybe everything isn't completely falling apart. We sat down in the kitchen and she made me tea while I tried to figure out how to start. Eventually, I just blurted it out. I think something's going on with Dad and Janet. She paused, clearly waiting for me to continue. So I started from the beginning. I told her about the whole "we can't afford your tuition" talk, the ultimatum, about switching schools, and how weird my dad had been acting since then. I explained how Zach and Alyssa seemed to be living their best lives, getting new gadgets and designer stuff, while I was being told to pack up my life and move to a new school. She didn't interrupt me once, which was rare for her. When I finished, she just said, "That doesn't sound right." That's when my grandpa walked in. He's not a man of many words, but he has this way of cutting straight to the point. He asked me one question. "Do you think your dad is hiding something?" It felt like someone had just said out loud what I'd been too scared to admit to myself. I nodded, and then the floodgates opened. I told them everything about how Zach admitted they'd been getting all this stuff as rewards, how I overheard Janet saying they'd bought Zach's new phone, even about sneaking a look at Zach and Alyssa's bags and finding all those luxury items. By the time I finished, my grandma looked furious. My grandpa didn't say much, but his expression was enough to let me know he wasn't happy either. Then my grandma dropped a bomb I didn't see coming. "You know we've been sending your dad money, right?" I just stared at her, completely lost. "What do you mean?" She explained that ever since my mom passed away, they'd been helping my dad financially. At first, it was just to get him through a rough patch because he'd lost his job and was struggling to take care of me on his own. But even after he got back on his feet, he asked if they could continue helping, just to make sure I'd have everything I needed. They agreed because, as my grandma put it, "We wanted to make sure you had the best opportunities, especially after losing your mom." She said they'd been sending him a check every month, enough to cover things like my school extracurriculars and anything else I might need. I asked her how much they'd been sending, and when she told me the number, my jaw practically hit the floor. It was more than enough to cover my tuition and then some. That's when the pieces started falling into place. It didn't take long to figure it out. The fancy bags, the designer clothes, the new gadgets, Zach and Alyssa's entire lifestyle had been funded by money that was supposed to be for me. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. I'd always known my dad had a soft spot for Zach and Alyssa, but I never thought he'd go this far. It wasn't just favoritism. It was stealing. He was taking money that my grandparents had given him in good faith. Money meant to help me, and using it to buy his stepkids affection. I must have looked as shocked as I felt because my grandma reached across the table and took my hand. "Honey, this isn't your fault," she said, her voice softer. "Now, if your dad's been doing this, that's on him, not you." But I couldn't shake the guilt. I felt like maybe I should have noticed sooner or said something earlier. Maybe if I'd been paying more attention, this wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. My grandpa finally spoke up. "We're going to get to the bottom of this." I wasn't sure what he meant at first, but then my grandma explained that they'd had a contract drawn up years ago when they agreed to keep sending my dad money. It was a way to make sure everything was above board. According to the contract, the money was supposed to go directly toward my upbringing. School clothes, medical expenses, things like that, and any leftover funds were to be put into a savings account for me to use when I turned 18. Hearing that made me feel a tiny bit better, but it also made me even angrier. My dad had gone out of his way to create this agreement to make it look like he had my best interests at heart, and then completely ignored it when it suited him. My grandparents asked if I'd noticed anything else that seemed off or suspicious. And that's when I remembered something. A couple of weeks ago, I'd seen my dad writing in a notebook he usually keeps locked up in his office. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I couldn't help wondering if it was related. My grandma sighed like she was trying to hold back her frustration. "Well, if he's been keeping track of the money, that's a start," she said, "but it doesn't excuse what he's done." At this point, I was feeling every emotion under the sun: anger, betrayal, confusion. But most of all, I felt helpless. I didn't know what to do next. And honestly, I wasn't sure if there was anything I could do. That's when my grandpa stood up and said, "We're handling this. I hope they really do something about it." And yeah, that's where things are for now. I know I said this was just going to be an update, but it's turned into a full-on mess. I'll let you all know what happens next, but right now, I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything. Thanks for sticking with me. I'll keep you posted. Update 3. Hello, everyone. I'm back with another update, and things have gotten even messier. Last time I left off, my grandpa stood up and said, "We're handling this." Well, he wasn't kidding. Things went from 0 to 100 real quick. And now it feels like the whole situation has exploded in my face. After my grandparents decided to take action, they didn't waste any time. My grandpa called their lawyer the same day to go over the contract they'd signed with my dad. I wasn't in the room during that call, but the vibe was tense. My grandma sat with me in the kitchen the whole time, trying to keep things light by talking about random stuff, but even she seemed distracted. Once my grandpa got off the phone, he told us that the lawyer wanted to set up a meeting immediately to review everything. Apparently, there were terms in the contract that explicitly laid out what my dad could and couldn't do with the money, and if he violated any of them, my grandparents had the legal right to take action. I didn't know how to feel about any of it. On one hand, I was relieved that someone was finally taking this seriously, but on the other hand, I couldn't stop thinking about how bad this was going to get. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was turning into a full-blown legal issue. The next couple of days were a blur. My grandparents were constantly on the phone with their lawyer, going over documents and figuring out their next steps. I stayed out of it for the most part, but every time I walked into the room, the tension was impossible to ignore. Finally, they decided to confront my dad. They didn't tell me the specifics of what they were planning to say, but I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. My grandpa is the kind of guy who doesn't mince words, and my grandma, while usually calm and gentle, had clearly reached her limit. I wasn't there for the actual confrontation, but I heard about it afterward. According to my grandma, they started off by asking my dad to explain where the money had been going. At first, he tried to dodge the question, saying stuff like, "It's complicated and you wouldn't understand." But when they pressed him, he eventually admitted that some of the money had been used for Zach and Alyssa. Some turned out to be a lot. He tried to justify it by saying that he was doing what he thought was best for the whole family and that he needed to keep Zach and Alyssa happy to maintain a peaceful household. My grandpa wasn't having any of it. He reminded my dad that the money was explicitly meant for me, not for buying gifts to win over stepids who clearly didn't care about him. That's when things got heated. My dad accused my grandparents of meddling in his life and said they had no right to tell him how to raise his family. My grandpa shot back that they absolutely had a right since it was their money he'd been misusing. At some point, my grandma said something that completely shut him down. She told him, "You're not just failing as a father, you're failing as a human being." When they told me about that part later, I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or heartbroken. I've never heard my grandma speak that harshly about anyone, let alone her own son-in-law. But the confrontation didn't end there. My dad clearly backed into a corner, started panicking. He said he'd pay back the money and make things right, but only if my grandparents dropped the legal action. My grandma told him that it wasn't about the money, it was about trust. She said that even if he somehow repaid every cent, it wouldn't undo the fact that he'd lied and betrayed their agreement. When my dad realized he couldn't talk his way out of it, he started shifting the blame. He tried to make it sound like this was all Janet's idea, saying she'd pushed him to spend the money on Zach and Alyssa. He even claimed that she'd made him feel like he had no choice if he wanted their marriage to work. That part hit me hard. I mean, I don't have the best relationship with Janet, but I never thought she'd have that kind of influence over my dad. And honestly, even if she did push him, it doesn't excuse what he did. He still made the choice to prioritize her kids over me. By the time my grandparents left, the conversation had completely fallen apart. My dad was defensive. My grandparents were furious, and nothing had been resolved. When they got back home, I could tell they were both exhausted. My grandpa sat down at the table and said, "Well, that went about as well as I expected." My grandma just shook her head and muttered something under her breath about how disappointed she was. I asked them what was going to happen next, and they told me they were moving forward with the legal action. My grandpa said he'd given my dad plenty of chances to come clean and fix things, but at this point, it was clear he wasn't going to take responsibility unless he was forced to. Hearing that made my stomach drop. I mean, I knew things were bad, but the idea of my family being dragged into a legal battle felt like too much. I kept thinking about what this would mean for me, for my dad, and for the rest of the family. Later that night, my dad started texting me. At first, I didn't want to respond, but I thought he's still my dad. You know, his messages were all over the place. One minute, he was apologizing and saying he'd fix everything, and the next, he was blaming my grandparents for blowing things out of proportion. He even tried to guilt trip me, saying stuff like, Don't you want your family to stay together? And if you talk to your grandparents, maybe we can all work this out without lawyers. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe he was being sincere, but another part of me couldn't ignore how manipulative it all felt. It was like he was more worried about saving his own skin than actually making things right. By the end of the night, I decided to stop responding. I blocked his number again, at least for now. I needed space to think and figure out what I wanted to do next. That's where things stand for now. My grandparents are moving forward with the legal process, and I'm trying to focus on school while everything unfolds. It feels like my life has turned into one big mess, and I don't know how to make sense of any of it. Do you guys think I should forgive my father? Because I keep thinking whether I'm making the right decision or not. Update 4. All right, here's the update. Things have been awkwardly quiet since I blocked my dad. My grandparents are handling all the legal stuff, and I've been trying to keep my head down and focus on school, but honestly, it's hard to stay focused when your entire family feels like it's imploding in real time. Then out of nowhere, my dad called me. I didn't recognize the number because, of course, he used a different phone. For a second, I thought about hanging up, but something told me to hear him out. The moment I answered, I knew it was him. His voice was shaky, like he was trying to sound calm, but couldn't quite pull it off. He jumped right in without giving me a chance to say anything. He said, "Hey, I know I've messed up. I just want to talk, okay?" I stayed quiet partly because I didn't know what to say, and partly because I wanted to see where he was going with this. He started apologizing, saying he knew he'd let me down and hadn't been the father I deserved. He said he regretted everything, taking the money, lying about it, and putting me in this position. For a split second, I felt like maybe he was being sincere. But then he kept talking, and something about his tone shifted. He said, "Look, I know your grandparents are upset, but this doesn't have to go any further. If you talk to them and convince them to drop the legal stuff, I promise I'll fix everything. I'll pay them back. I'll put money aside for your school, whatever you want." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about making things right. This was about saving himself. I asked him, why didn't you just do the right thing from the start? Why wait until lawyers are involved? He hesitated for a second and then said, "I didn't think it would get this far. I thought I could handle it on my own." That answer didn't sit right with me. It sounded less like an apology and more like an excuse. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. I told him I couldn't help him, that if he wanted to fix things, he'd have to do it himself. He started to get defensive, saying, "You don't understand how hard this is for me. I'm trying to protect this family, and I need you to help me do that." Protect the family. I almost laughed. The same guy who put me in this situation was now trying to play the hero. I stayed calm, but inside I was fuming. I told him, if you wanted to protect this family, you wouldn't have spent money meant for me on Zach and Alyssa. You wouldn't have lied about it, and you wouldn't be trying to guilt trip me into cleaning up your mess. He got quiet after that, for a second. I thought maybe I'd gotten through to him, but then he pulled out his last card. He said, "You're my daughter. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Don't you want us to get past this and be a family again?" That part hurt. As much as I've been angry with him, he's still my dad. And there's a part of me that does want things to go back to the way they were before all this. But the problem is I can't unsee what he's done. I can't just pretend everything is fine. I told him I do want us to be a family, but not like this. Not when it feels like I'm the only one trying to do the right thing. He didn't have a response to that. He just sighed and said, "I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry, I'm trying." I told him I needed time to think and hung up. After the call, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. At first, I felt guilty. Maybe I should have been more forgiving or given him a chance to explain himself. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that his apology wasn't about fixing things. It was about getting me to fix them for him. He didn't want to take responsibility for what he'd done. He just wanted me to smooth things over with my grandparents so he wouldn't have to face the consequences. That night, I talked to my grandparents about the call. I told them everything he said, including the part where he asked me to convince them to drop the legal stuff. My grandpa just shook his head and muttered, "Typical." My grandma looked sad but not surprised. She said, "Honey, this isn't your burden to carry. You didn't create this mess and you shouldn't feel responsible for cleaning it up." Hearing that helped a little, but it didn't erase the knot in my stomach. The next day, I got a text from my dad. Honestly, I'd unblocked his number after the call, thinking maybe we could have a real conversation, but it was more of the same. He said he'd been thinking about what I said and wanted to make things right. He even offered to start therapy as a family, which caught me off guard because he's always been the "we don't need a therapist, we can handle this ourselves" kind of guy. For a second, I thought maybe he was serious, but then he ended the message with, "If we can just get your grandparents to back off, I know we can fix this." And just like that, I knew nothing had changed. At this point, I'm done trying to make sense of his actions. I've spent so much time wondering why he did what he did, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever understand. What I do know is that I can't keep letting him drag me into his mess. I texted him back and told him I needed space. I said that if he was serious about fixing things, he'd do it without expecting me to play mediator. He hasn't responded, and honestly, I don't think he will. That's where things stand right now. My grandparents are still moving forward with the legal action, and I'm staying out of it as much as I can. I'm trying to focus on school and figure out what's next for me. I wish I had a better ending to this update, but the truth is, I don't know where this is going. All I can do is take things one day at a time and hope that eventually everything will make sense. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. I'll update again if anything changes. Final update. Hey, again, everyone. I wish I could tell you this is the end of the story, but if anything, it's just the beginning of a completely different one. I've learned more in the past week than I ever wanted to, and I honestly don't know how I feel about any of it. After I told my dad I needed space, I thought he'd back off for a bit, but instead he tried a different angle. He didn't text me directly again, but he started leaving voicemails, these long emotional messages where he kept saying he was trying his best and how he was only doing what he thought was right for our family. I didn't respond to any of them. My grandparents told me not to engage, especially since the legal stuff was already underway, but it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to this than I understood. Then 2 days ago, I got a call from my grandparents. They had just come back from another meeting with their lawyer, and they wanted to talk to me about something important. When I got to their house, my grandpa wasted no time. He said, "We found out what's really been going on." Apparently, during the legal process, their lawyer requested financial records from my dad to prove where the money had been going. It took some back and forth, but eventually they got what they needed. What they found? Well, let's just say it wasn't what any of us expected. It turns out my dad hadn't just been spending the money on Zach and Alyssa. That was bad enough, but it wasn't the whole story. A significant portion of the money had been going towards something else entirely, a business venture that my dad had been trying to start behind everyone's back. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. All this time, he'd been telling me there was no money for my school, no money for my future, and yet he'd been funneling it into some secret project. My grandparents explained that the business wasn't even doing well. From what the lawyer pieced together, it looked like he'd been hemorrhaging money for months trying to keep it afloat. That's probably why he started leaning even harder on the money my grandparents were sending. But the business wasn't just a bad idea. It was a flat-out scam. My dad had partnered with some shady entrepreneur who convinced him to invest in this get-rich-quick scheme. From what we could tell, it was one of those multi-level marketing setups where the only people who make money are the ones at the very top. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Is my dad that stupid to fall for something like that? And more importantly, how could he gamble with money that wasn't even his? At first I felt angry, like how dare he do this to me, to us? But then the more I thought about it, the more I started to feel sad. My dad had always been someone I looked up to. He wasn't perfect, but I thought he was smarter than this. I thought he cared more about me than chasing some stupid dream. The worst part, my grandparents told me that when their lawyer confronted him about the business, he tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal. He claimed that he was doing it for me, that he was trying to build something that would secure our future. Let me tell you, I've heard some ridiculous excuses in my life, but that one takes the cake. The reality is, my dad wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it for himself. He saw an opportunity to make a quick buck and didn't care who he hurt in the process. And when it all started falling apart, instead of owning up to it, he doubled down and dragged me into his mess. After hearing all of this, I realized there was no coming back from it. The apology call, the voicemails, the promises to fix everything, it was all just another way to manipulate me into cleaning up his mess. That night, I sat down and wrote him a long message. I told him I knew about the business, about how he'd been lying to me and my grandparents, and about how deeply he'd betrayed my trust. I said that while I loved him, I couldn't keep him in my life anymore. Not as long as he continued to prioritize his ego over everything else. I told him I wasn't blocking his number this time because I wanted him to understand that this wasn't about me running away from the situation. It was about me taking control of it. His response came about an hour later. It was short and defensive. "You don't understand the whole story, and it's not fair for you to judge me without knowing everything." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just another excuse. At that point, I knew I'd made the right decision. Now I think I have to readjust. My grandparents have been incredibly supportive through all of this, and they've assured me that no matter what happens with the legal case, they'll make sure I'm taken care of. It's not easy, though. Cutting ties with someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally is one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I know it's what I needed to do. As for the business and the lawsuit my grandparents are handling it, their lawyer is confident that they'll be able to recover at least some of the money, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. At this point, I'm just trying to focus on school and my own future. So yeah, that's where things stand right now. It's not a happy ending, but it's an ending. And maybe that's enough for now. Thanks again to everyone who's followed along and offered advice. You've helped me more than you know. I'll post another update if anything changes, but for now, I think this is it. Take care, everyone.